Today we're unpacking a new Netflix series called Adolescence, and we're doing it specifically for parents. Adolescence is not a documentary series, but it does feel a bit like watching one and was inspired by true events that happened in the UK. It was inspired by a string of knife violence perpetrated by young adults, specifically one where a 14-year-old boy killed a 12-year-old girl in 2021. The creators said they wanted to look straight into the eyes of male rage, toxic masculinity, and the growing indoctrination of young boys in the incel community online. The series is broken down into 4 episodes that are very easy to binge watch. Each episode follows one day in this drama as it unfolds, but packs a hell of an emotional punch. I'm going to break down some of the things that parents can learn from this series. Hi, I'm Nicole with The Nest Keeper, and our mission is to empower a new generation of homemakers. Episode 1. Episode 1 is all about digesting the reality that an adolescent can be responsible for a heinous crime. As the police break down the door to a modern family home and arrest a young man who pleads with his dad and says that he didn't do it, the viewer's stomach sinks. Nobody likes it, nobody wants to believe it or think about it, but teens are capable of violent crimes and do commit them. This episode confronts the idea of how the adult world feels about that and how difficult it is to navigate. It also implores us to think about how when a kid says he's innocent, how badly we want that to be true, and how utterly devastating it is when it's not true. As the viewer, we watch as the parents sit in a police station and discuss among themselves how police make mistakes, and this is just a mistake. And if they're patient, then things will work out, because there's no way that this could possibly be true. I think as a parent raising adolescents, this episode insists that we start to confront that as our babies grow into adults, there's a period of time where they are capable of so much more physically than what we're ready for them to be capable of. It insists we think about it now before it's too late. Address the difficult conversations head on and realize that your kid is still growing up, but is already capable of grown-up actions. Open the dialogue and have the conversations. Don't look past what your teen is capable of. The scene where the dad looks at his son after seeing the CCTV footage and just says, "What have you done?" is so heartbreaking, because we have seen throughout the whole entire first episode that this dad believes in his son, and he does not believe his son is capable of what he has done. So as a parent, it's easy for us to put ourselves in his shoes, because we would feel that way too. It is gut-wrenching, but in that moment, as parents, we feel so much empathy. The next step just automatically becomes, what can I do to keep that from happening to my family? What went wrong? Why did this happen? How? And is this something that I might be in danger of letting happen to my family? Episode 1 is so important because it's fundamentally a way to get parents to open up and effectively discuss this topic of conversation. Parents do need to wake up to this. It's easy to make excuses. It's easy to say, it can never be my kid. My teenager is different. Or boys are just being boys. Or when we see them leaning towards or thinking about dangerous things, dangerous activities, we try to give leeway and say, oh, they probably just need this to learn how to grow into a man. These are things that we might tell ourselves to navigate away from having to face this discussion or idea head on. So we don't have to try to navigate the situation responsibly as parents. We want to believe it's not possible. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we truly parenting through the possibility? Are we parenting them through growing from a very small child that is innocent and not capable of anything physically violent just because they're so small, into adolescents who are very capable of true violence in society? Or are we just trying to skate through and hope that nothing bad happens because we're good people? Honestly, as a whole, I think if we look at the big picture, we can see that society could use some growth in this area. According to the World Health Organization, worldwide, about 193,000 homicides occur among youth aged 15 to 29 each year, which is 40% of the total number of homicides globally each year. According to the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, in 2020, males accounted for 80% of all youth arrests for violent crimes, and their share was even greater for specific crimes like murder, 92%, and robbery, 88%. When I was in college, I came home one weekend to visit my mom, and we went out to dinner at a diner. At this diner, we were held at gunpoint by a group of teenagers in masks. They held up the whole diner, they made us get under the table just so that they could rob the establishment. And at the time, I could tell that they were teenagers. I was just out of high school myself, and to me, it was very obvious that these were adolescents wearing ski masks, holding guns. But the truth of the matter is that they were still real guns. And the teenagers felt invincible because they had masks and felt like they could conceal their identity. And these are very dangerous people in our society. They had guns, so they felt they could get what they wanted. They had masks, so they felt like they could conceal their identity and get away with it. In the area that I grew up in, I personally heard teenagers talking about and laughing about how scared people were when they were robbed, because robberies happened a lot in my area and teenagers were laughing about it. Teenagers' brains are not fully developed, they are not fully functioning, and they don't think about things all the way through. They don't think about the consequences, they don't think about long term effects, they don't have a concept of the long term emotional damage. They don't think about things going wrong and playing out differently than what they had planned and what they intended. They don't think about the worst case scenario being the actual case scenario that plays out. In this series, we see that happen with a friend who provided the knife. He didn't understand the full weight of his own actions. He gave his friend Jamie a knife because he believed that Jamie was just going to use it to scare a girl that had been bullying him. He didn't imagine the whole scene playing out the way that it did and consider all of the possible consequences. He didn't realize he was providing a murder weapon. Teenagers step into these roles very quickly with what seem like innocent enough to them stepping stones. Like, I'm just being a good friend, helping my friend, give him something to scare somebody that's bullying him with. I'm just, being nice. I'm being a good friend. I'm helping him out. And this gets them through to the point where they've done something that they never even intended to do before they're even capable of understanding long term consequences. They may put themselves in situations they can never come back from. As parents, we have to have constant open communication and dialogue with our children, with our teenagers, because we're the ones with fully developed frontal cortexes. We're the ones that can walk them through all of the possible outcomes. We're the ones that can encourage them to analyze their ideas, analyze their actions, ask themselves, is this a good stepping stone or is this a bad stepping stone? Could this lead to bad outcomes? And hopefully we can encourage them to remove some of those bad stepping stones before they find themselves at that final step and falling off. The goal is that your children trust you enough to come to you and have open dialogue and conversation with you about things that they're thinking about, because they are smart enough to know, hey, this might be a bad idea. And if they can talk to you about it and you guys have that constant flow of open communication and open dialogue, then you can help them make the right decision before bad choices ever become reality. It's your job as their parent to think about all the possible outcomes and long-term consequences, and then discuss them, because they might not be able to think of all of the things, but they're not deaf and they can hear you when you tell them. Don't wait until after the fact to be shocked by the possibilities. Have open dialogue with your teenagers and discuss all the day-to-day things that may be problems in their life, and discuss what they think is a good idea on how to solve the problems that are in their life. And if you help them solve a lot of problems, then they know that you're a good person to come to for advice when they do have a problem. Episode 2. Episode 2 takes place at Jamie's school. While D.I. Bascom searches for a motive and a murder weapon, we explore 2 themes with consequential depth. 1, the different villages that are helping to raise our children, and 2, the generational gap that forms between parents and teens. This was an incredibly powerful episode for parents, because it really showcases that if you get distracted and stop showing up in your kid's life, which becomes easier to do as they turn into teens, another part of your community is going to end up doing the heavy lifting when it comes to raising your adolescents and influencing your adolescence. And to some degree, they're doing that whether you're showing up or not. which is why, again, open dialogue is so important. Watching D.I. Bascom at the end of the episode take a lunch break and take his kid out to get some food just to make sure he was showing up for his kid was so powerful. Seeing him realize through the episode how much of his teenager's life was happening that he had no knowledge of and wasn't aware of and wasn't a part of was a good reminder for all parents. The phrase, "it takes a village," is a well known phrase that can help parents realize that and understand that the full responsibility of raising a child through their childhood, through their teenage years, does not fall completely on the shoulders and the responsibility of just one or two parents, but instead the community as a whole raises children. The truth is, the saying applies whether parents want it to or not. Some parents go out of their way to isolate children from the community as much as possible to try and prevent this by homeschooling or limiting any social interactions that they're not a part of. In general, however, for the average child, especially as they grow into teenagers, they are being raised by both their parents and the different communities that they are a part of. Most teens have a lot of different communities that are influencing them. They have schools, they have neighborhoods, parents' friend groups, family, possibly a church, TV shows that they're watching, and in our present generation, social media or online platforms. This is why we use the word village. Your child's village is their collective communities. And no matter how much you have the desire to be present in all of them, and maybe you're a helicopter parent and a control freak, and this is hard for you to hear, most likely you will not be present in all of the communities that are influencing your teenager. Episode 2 did a really good job at diving into looking at some of these communities, showing us and reminding us as parents that your adolescents are living in some communities that we as parents are just not a part of. When our kids are small, it's easy for us to be a part of all of their communities. It's easy to be present constantly and to say, well, they can't be alone with anybody else or anything else because they're not old enough to advocate for themselves. It's easy to have complete control over their influence when they're small children, especially if you have a parent that stays at home. But as our kids grow into teens, even the most helicopter parents usually have to allow their child to grow in some way in communities where that parent is not at all involved, outside of the influence and reach of the parents. Oftentimes, this is at school, and this is by their peers at school and their teachers at school. Traveling through the school on this particular day in this episode highlights how different this particular community is from a home life, or anything even remotely similar to Bascom's environments. D.I. Bascom comments how he doesn't like it. He doesn't like the feeling of being there. He doesn't like that his kid is there 5 days a week. It makes him uncomfortable. And his kid is not treated particularly well there either, and nobody's really doing anything about it. His son also points out not only are the environmental aspects different and the social interactions different than what Bascom experiences on a daily basis, there are subtle language differences and communication differences that can go right over Bascom's heads, and for all adults' heads for that matter. Most adults' heads for that matter. Adults don't understand the things that these kids are saying in the way that they're saying them. I did see many people that watched and commented on this show say things like, all of this could be fixed if we just keep kids offline. Or, you guys don't understand, parents just need to not let their children online, not let their teenagers online. But I think there's a bigger picture here. While I'm not going to comment on whether letting your teen online is good or bad, that is completely a decision for every parent to make on their own. I do want to say and point out that in this environment of the school, this communication is happening either way. And there will be this different language that is happening either way. And if your kid is the only one that is not using technology or emojis or their particular peer group's brand of communication, they will still be exposed to it, and most likely they'll just be made fun of for not understanding it sooner, being slow to pick it up, but they're still going to pick it up. Sheltering teens from things their entire peer group is doing doesn't usually go well for those teens. This is where we have to talk about the second point of the episode, and that is the generational gap that happens between parents and teens. I remember very vividly being a teen and thinking my mom just doesn't get it. And this was before teens were online. And now, as a parent, I see why it's so hard for parents to get it. We really are living in different worlds and different communities. We, as a society, especially with schools, we are creating this entire community that has nothing to do with our lives. We are not in those schools. We're sending them and into these communities that we've basically created, but we're not a part of. Even online, where both kids and adults are communicating, we are still really separated by our algorithms and the places we're choosing to visit. We're having different experiences within technology based communities as well. I think this episode shows that really well. The only way to bridge that gap is to have that constant open communication. You have to have a dialogue with your children. You have to have a vested interest in the way they communicate, in the way they're talking. You have to have a vested interest in the things they're learning and what feels important to them. You can't be judging them and wanting them to stop growing as people and stop learning the things they want to learn. You have to actively be a part of it and discuss it. Parents that just try to restrict everything end up just creating more of a gap, more of things that your teenager is doing that they're not going to talk to you about. You have to question with them what is happening in their lives and what it means, and if it's good or bad and why. Trying to control it by blocking it rarely works. Because when it comes to being on the same footing as their peers, teens are very good at figuring out how to bypass your systems. They don't want to be the kid that doesn't know what anybody else is talking about, and they're very creative and come up with good solutions to figure out how to make sure that they're not that kid that doesn't know what all the other kids know. Every moment in a kid's life is a teaching moment. And I've talked about this in previous videos. Whoever is there, whoever or whatever is showing up in your kid's life in that moment is what is raising them in that moment. The information they're learning is raising them. It's the entire community that is raising your kids and your teens, unless you are extremely isolated and they are extremely isolated. So you have to be present as much as possible to make sure that you are an important part of that village. I hear so many people talking about all the time, especially like the very strict parenting people, they're like, you don't want to be friends with your children. It's bad to be friends with your teen. Like, that's not your job. Your job is to parent them. But here's the thing, if you are not friends with your teenager, they do not respect your opinion. You need to figure out how to be both guidance and discipline and set boundaries while still being someone that they respect and someone that they are coming to for advice, someone that they consider a friend, someone that they trust. You want to be the voice that they listen to honestly above all of the other loud voices that are going to be in the room. They have to trust at a very real level that your voice is the voice of reason, that your voice is honestly the one that they want to listen to when there are tons of other loud voices in the room. Very loud voices, their friends' voices, their peers' voices, their bullies' voices, the loud guy yelling on the internet. Some parents are barely there, and some parents are there all the time. Be honest with yourself and ask yourself, which one are you? And do you need to make any changes? As a parent, being present is your strongest value. Episode 2 implores us to realize if we do not communicate with our children often, that generational gap is going to continue to grow, and we may never be able to communicate with them on their level. We may miss important signs and not hear them or see them in the case of this situation where it was online. And it may go right over our heads, and we may never understand it at all. Again, that final scene where the detective is walking back to his car, really pondering all that he saw and heard and learned that day, and realizing that he needed to show up more in his son's life was so real. Just telling him, hey, let's go get some food. and the son being like, okay, I can be hungry. It pointed out that it wasn't about the food. It wasn't about whether you have the time or this is what you need to do. It's about just making the time to spend with each other. It was so powerful because at the end of the day, this is the biggest step as parents that we can take to bridge our generational gaps and make sure that we are an active part and a major role in the village that is raising our teens. Episode 3. Episode 3 dives in to who Jamie really is. It is a character study of the boy who murdered his classmate. It takes place 7 months after the murder, so we know that it's not shock or processing causing him to act certain ways. It's really a character study of who he actually is. It's a deeper look at the day-to-day Jamie. What is really going on in his head? He's being interviewed by a psychologist, and we see her watching him on the TV, just really like looking at him. So we understand the purpose of this episode is really just to take a deeper, harder look at Jamie. What is going on with Jamie? We see that he doesn't have mommy issues. He doesn't have daddy issues. He seems to have a normal family dynamic. He's even making jokes about his granny. But the psychologist keeps bringing up the dad and masculinity because the main purpose of this interview on this day is to understand Jamie's understanding of what it means to be a man. Because at the end of the day, it seems as if Jamie murdered this girl because his masculinity was threatened and she didn't give him what he wanted. As the story unfolds, we see that both of them, both Jamie and the girl, Katie, had been bullied in very emotional and difficult ways. She was shamed by the school for a nude photo that she had sent to her boyfriend privately that then got shared around the school. And her femininity was attacked because everybody was calling her flat-chested. Jamie's masculinity was attacked because he was poked fun of on pictures on his social media page, and they told him that he was part of an incel group. Both Kate and Kate's femininity and Jamie's masculinity were both attacked. They both were dealing with this widespread knowledge of like that they were being bullied. But Jamie was the only one who felt like murder was the proper response. I really appreciated that this episode worked that in there, that this is something that happens to both girls and boys, like this kind of attacking of what they are meant to grow into, like a girl growing into a woman, a boy growing into a man. And that does get attacked at school usually for a lot of kids. I also find it interesting that in the English language, we don't even have a word like emasculate for girls, but it's not just a man's problem. It is a girl's problem too. And this is something that happened to girls a lot, like the size of her boobs is often attacked by the boys around her. What Jamie does have that stands out is confidence issues. He thinks he's bad at sports. He thinks he's bad at being clever. He says that he's bad at everything. And he specifically calls himself ugly. The show, both in this episode and the next episode, brings up that Jamie's father looked ashamed of him when he was bad at sports. And I think that this was brought up and was kind of emphasized in the show a little bit to point out that parents do have an effect, whether directly, meaningfully, or accidentally, on children's confidence, self-confidence, whether they know it or not, whether it's intentional or not. Children's self-confidence can be heavily influenced by their parents. Jamie doesn't know who he is, but he's trying desperately to figure it out. And you can tell when the psychologist is asking him about himself, he doesn't know. He thinks he's probably not likable, and so he has to manipulate society and girls to get what he wants. He mentions that he thought Kate would go out with him after she was bullied because she was weak. And this is kind of like a manipulation tactic to get a girl, even though he had previously said that he didn't really like her and he thought she was flat-chested. He still saw that she was in a position of weakness where he could manipulate her, and so then he could get a girl. And then when she said no, he decided that she was a bitch. This episode was designed to look at toxic masculinity head on and figure out where it develops from, and how. As parents, we're trying to also discover the root cause of this kind of thought process and behavior. This episode is asking those questions. It's really disturbing to watch and to break down what is happening. I personally watched this episode 2 times, and it was honestly a great character study. We see that Jamie likes to label people and put them in boxes. He calls the psychologist posh because she uses words differently than him. He also doesn't view girls as friends or mates. Women are for something different. His father doesn't have any girls that are mates, and he thinks that if his father did have friends that were girls or mates, that would make his dad like not a good husband to his mom. He sees girls as something uh, for a different purpose than to be friends. He says that if he takes a girl out, he would take her out to someplace nice, maybe a movie, and then he would try to do sexual stuff with her, maybe kiss her or touch her, because that's what girls are actually for. Like, that's his end goal when it comes to girls. The psychologist was a woman, so the way Jamie acts towards the psychologist also gives us some insight into how Jamie feels like is appropriate to treat a woman. Gives us some insight in how he feels about women. He was constantly second guessing her motives, convinced she was trying to get him to say something that he didn't want to say, but he also wanted to be superior to her. He wanted to be the boss. He wanted to tell her how to act. And he thought it was acceptable to throw things and yell at her, try to intimidate her with his body language, and then just apologize and continue like it never happened. But at the end, what was really chilling was that what he desperately wanted, despite all of this, was to really know that if she and if girls found him likable, despite all this completely toxic behavior. Toxic behavior that included murdering a girl, by the way, which he did not admit to over the course of the episode, but he did admit to having a knife. And then went on to try to justify whatever he had done because what he could have done was worse. He said that he could have touched her, that other guys would have touched her, and he didn't, so that's great. He basically was trying to justify his behavior by saying he didn't sexually assault her and he could have and other guys would have. And this is actually also very common toxic masculinity where they will excuse whatever bad stuff they've done because they could have done something worse. And I do think that this is a toxic male behavior that can develop in the teenage years and is probably something as parents we should start addressing early on. Jamie also constantly felt like he was being overpunished. Like whatever he had done wasn't as bad as what he was being punished for, and it wasn't fair. It wasn't right that he was being punished in this way. At the end of the day, Jamie didn't feel like he had really done anything wrong. Episode 4. Episode 4 was a day in Jamie's family's lives. His dad's 50th birthday. It was 13 months after the murder, and it really emphasized this fact that Jamie didn't just ruin his life. Jamie didn't just ruin Kate's life or end Kate's life, or ruin Kate's life's family's lives. This episode points out how Jamie ruined his family's lives. The butterfly effect of Jamie's actions on Jamie's family. And I think this episode very specifically was about accountability. Who is and isn't held accountable? It was an entire village that created the Jamie that believed he was right in murdering a girl. And yet, the same village turned on Jamie's family. The village only believed that Jamie's family was responsible. The neighbors ostracized the family. They claimed to not see when bad things happened at the house, even though they were clearly out and about. Nobody saw when the room got spray painted. Uh, there were teenagers that were from Jamie's school. They were the same teenagers that were bullying D.I. Bascom's son at school. They were the ones that were spray painting the family's van and basically, blaming the family, calling the family names, even though they were very clearly part of the village that created this Jamie. This episode takes a long, hard look at just how much blame and how much long-term suffering is on the family of Jamie and how much they have to live with for the rest of their lives. The parents discuss how much they feel like it's their fault because Jamie came from them. He was their son. He came from her and him. So they that's where they start with like, this has to be our fault. But then they also point out how they raised a great daughter, fabulous daughter, wonderful daughter. She's perfect, and she came from the same two parents in the same household, uh, with the same parenting techniques. So they're kind of pointing out this idea that there had to be other factors at play here too. I think that episode 4 was really driving home the point made in episode 2 that it takes a village to raise a child. However, episode 4 brings us to the chilling conclusion that if something does go wrong, the village does not take responsibility, only the parents do. So then the parents question, should they have done more? And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. They agree. The answer is yes. They could have done more. They should have done more. And the sad, awful ending is the father sitting on the bed in his son's room, tucking in the little teddy bear that was his son's because his son is no longer there, and just crying and telling that teddy bear that is now in place of his son that he's sorry, that he's sorry. You know, he's sorry that he didn't do more. He's sorry that he let him down. He's sorry that he's his dad, and this is the ending. As parents, I think this is a good reminder to analyze our life and ask ourselves the question, are we doing enough now for our teenagers? Because it's easy to give the village reins, especially with our teens, because they seem so self-sufficient. But at the end of the day, we are the ones held responsible, not the village. In conclusion, this series is an incredibly deep look at violence perpetrated by young men, toxic masculinity, community, and generational gaps that form between parents and teens. It's an amazing study of 4 specific days that creates an entire story and forces us as parents to ask ourselves the hard questions and consider topics that most of us are not interested in entertaining. But it makes us realize that maybe we should. So I suggest watching, maybe more than once, as hard as it is. Communicate with your kids and be present in their life. Happy nesting, nest keepers.